Hey everyone, Joe Waxman here. And in this video, I want to look at the chart of sage, guru, teacher, spiritual, ascended master, Ramana Maharshi of India. Guys, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe if you have not already. All right. So some of you probably don't know who Ramana Maharshi is. So let's go through it. So he's an Indian Hindu sage who became enlightened at a very young age. He was 16, and I read the story. It doesn't really describe it well here. He wanted to know what death was, so he let his mind die and he received enlightenment, basically. So yeah, I mean, and then so he moved to the mountain. He left home, and he moved to the mountain out of an intuition, a calling, Arunachala mountain, where he took up residence. And then he meditated deeply in what's called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That's the full, deepest level of meditation. And he stayed that way for a long time. And he had some people looking over him. Not sure how that happened exactly, but some people came to realize that he was, an enlightened master and started looking after him. Because he was deep in meditation and was not even taking care of his body, not feeding himself, not bathing or anything. He was just deep in meditation. And then he built this, eventually came out of it and became this sage. And then he built an ashram on the Arunachala mountain and became this incredible teacher. I'm not sure if there's anything worthwhile. I mean, the details don't really matter. There's so many stories about him, very powerful, inspiring stories about how he helped so many people, attain spiritual liberation. And he was incredibly compassionate and kind. He had a special connection to the animals. He could talk to animals, and he loved animals. And he lived in the forest of the mountains. The monkeys would come to him, and he would feed them, and he understood what was going on in the monkey kingdom. Apparently they have a whole kingdom we don't even realize, but they have a king. They have all different society and culture. I'm not going to go through this detail. What I do want to do is this is his website. I want to read some of his teachings because I think that's more important than the details of his life. He was regarded by many as a sphinx. He spoke little and only in reply to what is asked. He's mostly silent. His works are cryptic and capable of diverse interpretations. So he revealed the direct path of self-inquiry and awakened mankind to immense spiritual power. He explains so much. Let's see. All right, let's just go into this. I want to read some of this because this will give you a better idea of who he actually is. You can download this book, and I encourage you to if you're interested. Who Am I? It's the central teachings of Ramana Maharshi. And then there's other books, Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi. But who am I? Every living being longs to be happy, untainted by sorrow, and everyone has the greatest love for himself, which is solely due to the fact that happiness is his real nature. Hence, in order to realize that inherent and untainted happiness, which indeed he daily experiences when the mind is subdued in deep sleep, it is essential that he should know himself. For obtaining such knowledge, the inquiry who am I in quest of self is the best means. Now, just a little commentary. In deep sleep, we all love to sleep, but we're not our conscious being. We're not our conscious self in deep sleep. We're in a state of contentment. And how do we know? Because we love to sleep. We love, we don't want to get up. When we're tired, we love sleeping. There's a deep sleep. There's a knowingness that we are very contented when we are in deep sleep. It feels very good. Everyone knows that. There's nobody who doesn't know that. And if we don't get sleep, we get very upset, right? We love to sleep, everyone, universal, right? So sleep is good, and that's a pointer to our true nature, right? You have to think about these things. You can't just take every life for granted and just be like, it's all automatic and, never question anything. And so he suggests we ask ourselves, who am I? Because this is really important, and don't pass this by. It's incredibly important to ask yourself this and to really take this question on. Who am I? I am pure awareness. The awareness is by its very nature being conscious, bliss, Sat Chit Ananda. If the mind, which is the instrument of knowledge and is the basis of all activity, subsides, the perception of the world as an objective reality ceases. Unless the illusory perception of the serpent in the rope ceases, the rope on which the illusion is formed is not perceived as such. This analogy is based on a traditional story of a man who sees a rope at twilight and, mistaking it for a serpent, is afraid without cause. Similarly, unless the illusory nature of the perception of the world as an objective reality ceases, the vision of the true nature of the self on which the illusion is formed is not obtained. Now, I'm going to make a little commentary just because I don't want to rush this. This is important to understand. This is more than just astrology for me, this particular, because Ramana Maharshi really does reflect the highest truth in my estimation and many other people's. And so it's important to reflect upon his words. And so just when he's talking about objective reality, we think reality is objective, and just a little commentary on that. It's incredibly not objective at all, because even our perceived reality of what we're talking about, like how do we know reality exists? Well, we have our five senses: the eyes, the ears, the touch, the smell, the taste. All of these are limited, right? Even if we're taking, like, we can have look at it scientifically and look at all the different particles out there, the X-rays and the different energies, the various radiation, the various frequencies, and all that. Most of it is beyond our perception. So we're not even seeing reality. We're not hearing reality. There's many tones we cannot hear. There are many things that we cannot sense, right? And so you can go deep into that and even realize that there are different dimensions that we're unaware of. So it's not objective reality, what we're seeing, what we're experiencing. Our experience is not objective reality. And that's the point that he's getting to. In order to get to true reality, we have to go deeper. And if we're not seeing true reality, what are we seeing? We're seeing an interpretation based on our own state of being, which is often, clouded and illusory and confused, right? We're seeing from our own two eyes. And therefore, everything that we're seeing is a reflection of us. It's not objective reality. And it's very important to realize that, because people always want to claim objective reality. I have the objective truth. Religious fundamentalists, and I'm not going to pick on any religion because it's human nature to get fundamentalist about it. And then just say, my truth is the right truth and your truth is the wrong truth. You're telling lies. I'm telling the truth. I have it all figured out. You don't. Therefore, I'm going to kill you. Right? That's basically what everyone's doing on the lower levels. As we become more wise, we understand that it's all perception, it's all conditioning, it's also social culture, right? We're born into a society and they teach us certain things and we get used to it, and then we want to claim objective reality. I have the truth, right? Whatever it is, right? And this closes our mind to experiencing anything other than our perceived objective truth. Once we realize that we don't know anything and we're just trying to figure it out, then we can start to see a much bigger picture, right? That's why it's important to question and to not to assert your version of your cultural conditioning, limited in time and space, Time and space are both infinite, right? Infinite. And we're experiencing like a tiny, 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 tiny dot of reality. And we're like, oh, this is the truth. Yep. I've got the truth, even though everyone else is thinking something different. I got it. I got it all figured out. Me, yep, me, I got it. Like, it's so stupid and arrogant when you take it apart and you realize it. Like, it's like infinite, infinite, and I got it. I figured it all out. Yep, I'm awesome. I figured it all out. Right. I just so happened to be born to parents who just knew everything, and just they introduced me to the objective truth. Like, it's so incredibly arrogant and stupid. Right. So we have to realize that we don't know everything. That's the first step. The mind is a wondrous power residing in the self. It causes all thoughts to arise. Apart from thoughts, there is no such thing as mind. Therefore, thought is the nature of mind. Apart from thoughts, there is no independent entity called the world. In deep sleep, there are no thoughts, and there is no world. In the states of waking and dream, there are thoughts, and there is a world also. So he's differentiating the dream state. I know some people are like, well, I think in my sleep, I have dreams. That's not deep sleep. That's a differentiation. When you're dreaming, we're not in deep sleep. When we are really, truly in deep sleep, there is no dreams. We are in deep rest, and we are also deeply, deeply contented. That's important to recognize. Okay? That without the mind, there's deep contentment, right? And it's not like, oh, we can't live without the mind. That's not what it is. The mind here is thought. And you can exist in the waking state with your eyes open, aware, without thought. And that is the enlightened state. And the reason why he's pointing to it is because it's carrying that contentment that we find in deep sleep into our whole existence. So it's like, once you have that contented state, you're not chasing desires. And what's all the problems in the world? Everyone's unhappy, chasing desires, chasing money, chasing love, chasing power, chasing sex, chasing, altered states of mind, drugs and alcohol, everything, afraid of running from fear of death and disease and, all the stuff, right? But if we have this contentment, we're not chasing anything. We're not running from anything. We're fully complete in this moment. And that is the enlightened state. That is the highest achievement of humanity. There really is nothing else, right? And just as a side note, Jesus was enlightened, and this is the same thing. Like, this is Christ consciousness. So, some people are like, oh, if you're not Christian, you hate Jesus, and therefore I hate you, and you should die, right? Stuff like that. That's just religious fundamentalism, and it's like rocks for brains. It's that ignorant. It's that low level. It's really bottom of the barrel when you have that kind of thinking, right? You're just really, you're evolutionary. You're like a tadpole, right? So just want to put that out there, that's not at all where I'm coming from. I'm not denying Jesus or anyone else, right? I'm putting it in context that Jesus and everyone else, we're all part of the same universe, and the same rules apply to all of us. And he was an enlightened being. And so I'm fully for Jesus. I'm just not for religion, the religious interpretation that Jesus was the only Son of God, and therefore we have to conform to the church's interpretation, which is all it is. It's like their perspective, their controlled narrative, and it's cherry picked books and edited text and all that. It's completely man-made. There's nothing God about it. It's like, don't get me started, but yeah. In any case, that's all man. That's all power, control, and ignorance. But what we're talking about, the Christ consciousness, the Buddha consciousnness, they're the same. Like, you don't have to compete. People are like, oh, Jesus was the only Son of God, and Buddha, all the elders, they were nothing, or like the other way around. Buddha was and all the rest were nothing. Like, who? Like, no. Like, these are all people who truly understood. It's all the people below them who are competing, comparing, being fundamentalist about them. None of that applies to this Christ consciousness, to this Buddha consciousness, to this enlightened Satori Nirvana consciousness. Full awareness, God consciousness, self-awareness, self-realization. Just as the spider emits the thread of the web out of itself and again withdraws it into itself, likewise, the mind projects the world out of itself and again resolves it into itself. When the mind leaves the self, the world appears. Therefore, when the world appears, the self does not appear. And when the self appears, shines, the world does not appear. And he's talking about the illusory nature, which is called Maya in Hinduism, of the world. It's all illusory because it's not objective reality. It's subjective, subject to you, subject to how ignorant or how aware you are. If you're very ignorant, the world appears one way. If you're very aware, it appears completely differently. And if you're absorbed in the self, what he's calling the self, which is God consciousness, the world does not appear. It's all God. The world meaning differentiation and different, all these different things. We say, I have this cup, this is separate, and everything's separate, and our bodies, I'm separate, I'm a separate, everything's separate. We have all these separate things, right? That disappears when you're fully absorbed in what he calls the self, because there is only one self, that is consciousness. When one persistently inquires into the nature of the mind will subside, leaving the self as residue. The mind always exists only by depending on something gross, physical body. It cannot exist independently. It is the mind that is called the subtle body or the soul. Okay? That which rises as I in the body is the mind. If one inquires as to where in the body the thought I rises first, one would discover that it rises in the heart. That is the place of the mind's origin. Even if one thinks constantly, I, one will be led to that place. Of all thoughts that arise in the mind, the I thought is the first. It is only after the rise of the I thought that other thoughts occur. Now, I encourage you to start to notice this. Start to notice your thoughts, start to notice the I thought, because we go, just try and observe yourself thinking, right? I. What does I mean? I is a word. I like say it a bunch of times, it becomes abstract. You don't even know what it means anymore, because that's the nature of the mind. But when we're lost in the projection of the mind, we start to believe the I thought is real, right? This is like imagining the rope is a snake, right? It's really a rope, but we think it's a snake. Same with the thoughts. These are all abstract, right? What's the I thought referring to? And who's thinking, right? Who's doing thinking? I is not the self, but we imagine that the I thought is the self. I. Well, it refers to the body, but we are not the body. We are the observation, and this becomes clear when you start paying attention to your own thoughts, because there is the awareness of the thought, and the thought is not itself the thing. It's the awareness of the self, the thought. Just as the eye cannot see itself. You cannot see your own eye, in case you haven't noticed, unless you're looking in a mirror or a video or something like that. But that's not really your eye. Your eye will never see itself. And the self will never see itself. The self will see only what it is not. Therefore, whatever the self sees, it is not. So by this logic, and it's important to be very logical about it, if you can witness your own thoughts, I, do that again and again. Watch yourself thinking, you realize that you are not your thoughts. And that's important to make this distinction. And this is very key in starting this process, this unwinding process of realizing that we are not what we think we are. We are something that is far more subtle. And this is what passes on from body to body. It's just that we have to do the work in the body. But when the body drops, this thing, they call it the jiva in Hinduism, the spirit, the soul, leaves the body and then goes through its processes and comes back in another body, right? We call that reincarnation. But that thing is within us. It's not the thought. It is behind the thought, right? So watch yourself thinking, and you'll start to unwind this confusion that is ego, right? The I thought is very important. Watch yourself thinking that. The thought, who am I, will destroy all other thoughts. And like the stick used for stirring the funeral pyre, it will itself be burnt up in the end. Then there will be self-realization. When other thoughts arise, one should not pursue them, but should diligently inquire, to whom do they occur? It does not matter how many thoughts arise. As each thought arises, one should inquire with alertness, to whom has this thought arisen? The answer that would emerge would be, to me. Therefore, if one inquires, who am I? The mind will go back to its source, and the thought that arose will subside. Now, I mean, this is a great practice, and I've done it many times. It does not immediately lead to enlightenment unless you're incredibly ripe for that. But what it does is it unwinds you, and it clarifies things, and it disperses the clouds, and you start to see things clearly. It literally will make you more intelligent. I can guarantee this. You will become more intelligent if you do this, because it's dispersing the clouds, it's dispersing the confusion. If you're less confused, what are you? Naturally, you're more clear and intelligent, and you can see the world and reality far more clearly. And so this is a process. It's not something that happened just, oh, I asked myself, who am I? And I'm enlightened. Like, probably not. Unless you're Ramana Maharshi, and he was ripe for it through many past incarnations, spiritual practice. But you can do wonderful work with this and become very, very clear, and it will help you understand everything. Like, even if you want to be a scientist, even if you want to be an artist, even if you want to be a politician or a business person, whatever you want to do, you will become far more intelligent if you start to understand that we are not the body, we are not the mind. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Find out, who am I? And you will not answer it in words. You will not answer it in thoughts. You will answer it in realization. And that's the intelligence shining through. Your light will become brighter. You will become far more aware and awake of the universe, right? This has helped me tremendously with astrology, because I can just see things far more clearly, because I practiced this many times, and I probably need to keep practicing a lot more, but I'm sharing my experience. With repeated practice in this manner, the mind will develop the power to stay in its source. When the mind that is subtle goes out through the brain and the sense organs, the gross names and forms appear. When it stays in the heart, the names and forms disappear. Not letting the mind go out, but retaining it in the heart is what is called inwardness. Letting the mind go out of the heart is known as externalization. Thus, when the mind stays in the heart, the I, which is the source of all thoughts, will go, and the self, whichever exists, will shine. Right? It's sort of like meditation. He's not calling it meditation, but he's describing a process or a practice of both self-inquiry and meditation. The two are the same. Like, you can have a more active version where you're thinking, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And like trying to go that route, or you're just being silent and resting in the self or the heart of the being, however you want to call it. People become obsessed with names. I don't know if you realize that. Names and forms. When they're very asleep, you go out in the world and basically everyone's asleep. They're obsessed with names and forms. And you're saying, no, it's not this name, it's that name. This matters, and I'll kill you for this name. Like, this form, this name, this picture, this is it. And we'll go to war. We'll kill each other because I have the right name. It's like the most ignorant thing anyone could ever do. This name, it has to be this name. The names don't matter. That's the whole real, that's one of the real, I mean, that's a very tiny realization. I mean, anyone with half a brain should understand that you can call it whatever you want. And it's like, no, my God is the true God, not your God that you call a different name, that has a different picture, that you have different cultural conditionings about, right? It's my God. Like, oh my, it's the stupidest, most childish, ignorant thing ever. It doesn't matter the name, doesn't matter the form, doesn't matter the picture, right? If we're talking about one God, that's one God. It's the same one God across the universe. Forget like different countries and cultures. We go to everywhere in the universe. One God, it's the same God. I hate to break it to you, but if there's one God, it's the same God everywhere, right? So none of the details matter. And if you have like a particular messenger, appreciate the messenger, but it's not about the messenger. Whether it's, whoever, Moses, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, whatever, it doesn't matter, right? And then all this arguing about like, oh, my God and my messenger with this picture and this name and this cultural, conditioning surrounding it. It's like, these are idiots. These are real idiots. These are dumb, fucking stupid idiots who don't know anything and who are deeply asleep. They're clouded, shrouded in, confusion and low level, consciousness. Like, these are spiritual tadpoles. Other than inquiry, there are no adequate means to make the mind permanently subside. If the mind is controlled through other means, it will appear to be controlled, but will rise again. Through regulation of breath, the mind will become calm, but it will remain calm only as long as the breath remains controlled. When the breath is no longer regulated, the mind will become active and start wandering. See, there's all these techniques to calm the mind, but you have to take it into your consciousness. Unless it's deep within your consciousness, it's not going to do anything. That's why we have to work with thought. That's why thought is the most profound way of coming to the realization. Yes, you can do other ways, but this is the most direct way. Like the practice of breath control, meditation on the forms of God, repetition of mantras, the restriction on diet are temporary aids for stilling the mind. Through practice of meditation on the forms of God and through repetition of mantras, the mind attains one-pointedness. For such a focused mind, self-inquiry will become easy. By observing diet restriction, the quality of mind improves, which helps self-inquiry. So he's saying these are aids and these are important. And I observe dietary restrictions. I'm very food conscious. I was raised to be, and that definitely helps for the quality of mind. You don't want to go out there eating junk and poisoning yourself with pills and chemicals and radiation and injections and all that. You won't be able to think clearly. You'll just be endlessly confused. However sinful a person may be, if he would zealously carry on meditation on the self, he would most assuredly get reformed. The mind should not be allowed to wander towards worldly objects and what concerns other people. However bad other people may be, one should bear no hatred for them. All that one gives to others, one gives to oneself. If this truth is understood, who will not give to others? When one's self arises, all arises. When one's self becomes calm, all becomes calm. To the extent we behave with humility, to that extent good will result. If the mind becomes still, one may live anywhere. And this is just the shortened version of his teachings. You can download the book and other, there's many teachings. Right? What exists in truth is the self alone. The world, the individual soul, and God are appearances in it like silver in mother of pearl. These three appear at the same time. The world, the individual, and God, right? Well, it's all one, right? There's no division. People say there's all these divisions. God is out there, and this is not God, and that's not God, and God is this, right? God is found in the Bible or the, whatever your holy text is, the Quran or who cares, right? It's all the same, That's nonsense. It's all one consciousness, right? We have to understand that. The self is that where there is absolutely no I thought. That is called silence. The self itself is the world. The self itself is I. The self itself is God. All is Shiva, the self. All is one. All is one consciousness. He who gives himself up to the self, that is God, is the most excellent devotee. Giving oneself up to God means constantly remembering the self. Whatever burdens are thrown on God, he bears them all. Since the supreme power of God makes all things move, why should we, without submitting ourselves to it, constantly worry ourselves with thoughts as to what should be done and how, and what should not be done and how not? We know that we know that the train carries all loads. So after getting on it, why should we carry our small luggage on our heads to our discomfort instead of putting it down in the train and feeling at ease? People will come up with all kinds of excuses so as to why they shouldn't try to understand the true nature of reality. But the thing is that you don't automatically, like, they imagine, like, like sitting alone on the mountaintop in a loincloth and meditating forever, and they're like, I don't want that. I can guarantee you that's not going to happen to you if you start this. What will happen to you is your mind will become clearer, and you will be able to do all the things that you're already doing far better. You will be at peace. You will become wiser, more intelligent, and you will understand life far greater. You will not become, a loincloth wearing yogi sitting on the mountaintop. 100% guarantee you. If you are destined to do that, that's what you will want to be, right? And if you don't want to be, you will not. I guarantee you. You will just do everything better. You will improve in all areas of your life. Your relationships will become better. Your business will become better. You will be able to do everything better. Yeah. So just a little side note about that. So don't worry. It's very important for everyone to try and understand the truth, the true one objective reality. Okay, so thanks for, if you're still watching, thanks for bearing with me. I needed to, or wanted to rather, really explain some of his teachings because they're profound and important for the world to understand, especially at this difficult time we are in. Now, this is his astrology chart. Beautiful grand Earth trine. Very, very strong. That's one of the first things to notice. Second thing is that he was born during an eclipse. Not too dissimilar to Donald Trump. Anyone born during an eclipse has a very karmic life, a very impactful life. Right? Capricorn sun in the third quadrant, fourth whole sign house, conjunct the North Node. So Capricorn sun, people think, this is really interesting and a great example because people think Capricorn is all about materialism and worldly gain and accomplishment, and you can't possibly be spiritual if you're Capricorn. Like conversely, like people with Pisces suns are like, I'm so spiritual, and Pisces is the 12th sign, and it's automatically an indication that I'm so evolved and so spiritual. Nonsense. It's that's astrological garbage. In fact, you can be completely enlightened to being a Capricorn, right? He's a perfect example, and Capricorn really indicates the leadership and being the boss, right? And so he built a whole ashram around him. Like people from everywhere were gathered around. He had many visitors, many buildings. There was a whole community that he built around himself as the leader. And conjunct the North Node also indicates a certain kind of fame or recognition, bigness to the personality. He's world famous. I mean, this is as far as like spiritual gurus and teachers go, he's like at the top, right? This is like the premier spiritual teacher of the modern era, Ramana Maharshi. Like he's number one. It's in the third house, so communication, media, but also fourth house, right? So the communication is aspected here, and he wrote. He didn't actually write. I think people wrote for him, or he might have written some stuff, but he spoke. He didn't speak a lot, but he spoke very profoundly when he did speak, right? And people would ask him stuff, and they would write down his responses. Very excellent communicator. I mean, that's what he's famous for. But as well as fourth house, the ashram, the mountain, which he loved. The mountain was his love, right? He wrote poems to the mountain. He loved the mountain. He would walk all around the mountain, and it was his love. It was his partner. Like I mean, people don't think of it like that, but to somebody like Ramana Maharshi, who was just like a behemoth of a soul, a completely a Buddha or a Christ. I mean, without exaggeration, right? His partner was the mountain. That was his love. but that's fourth house, right? The ashram, the many buildings. He had animals, there were cows, yeah, and all kinds of stuff. Like one of his cow, Lakshmi, he said was a soul who was on their last incarnation, and they just had some karma to fulfill, and so they incarnated as a cow. Believe it or not, a highly evolved soul who was just on the verge of enlightenment was a cow, and the cow would come to him, and he would hold the horns, and they would go into samadhi together, and the tears would run down the cow's face. This was, believe it or not, like a soul that was far more evolved than pretty much everyone in the world, most people, right? Like they're just the very, 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 very rare few that were that evolved, and was a cow. So I mean, the reason I'm telling you this is because we can't get too small-minded about what is what. Animals are dumb and they belong to us, and we're here to dominate the nature, and God gave it all to us, and we eat all the cows, and like that's ignorant. And I'm not saying people should not eat meat. That's not my point. I'm just saying we don't always know, and we need to be respectful and reverent. You know, you can have an animal that is more involved than a human. That can happen, in fact, right? And he was highly aware of this, and he could see into the spiritual nature of everyone and everything. He knew, like he was deeply, deeply aware, right? He could communicate with all the animals. Snakes would come into his ashram. He would talk to the snakes and ask them to leave, and they would leave. He could talk to all the animals, right? So third house, communication, fourth house, home. And North Node, very expansive, very huge leadership type personality, Capricorn. Okay. Sun is ruling the 11th house of groups and networks. And so, yeah, the ashram, many people live there. Many people were a part of his community. That was the thing, 11th house, community. Right? Let's see, moon in Cancer. So moon in perfect dignity in Cancer, conjunct the MC, very powerful, conjunct South Node. So the thing about South Node and moon is that it's highly psychic. It's the most psychic, in fact, especially in good dignity, especially in Cancer. It's the most intuitive, the most psychic. The most people, like if you go into psychic circles where they're really powerful, like real psychics, most of them will have South Node moon, right? It can cause mental disturbances when young, imbalances, especially for people who are not as prepared, not as evolved, and depending on the aspects to it, you know, and house and sign. But for somebody like Ramana Maharshi, you know, so I mean, this is just like extremely psychic, extremely powerful, and shows that in the public eye, he has, you know, his heart, his caring, his nurturing. That's very apparent. That's very, and he was incredibly compassionate to all people and to all animals, like deeply so. That one time there was an egg that like he caused to drop, like an egg in a nest, the bird's egg, and it cracked. And he was so moved and so profoundly upset and disturbed that he caused that. He wrapped the egg in some cloth and prayed over it and put it back, and the chick hatched, you know. And so that kind of thing, if he went on a walk through the mountain, and if he stepped in a bee's nest in the ground, he would let the bees sting him, and because he said, oh, that's, you know, that's karma or whatever. I'm paraphrasing, you know, that's what that, you know, I stepped in their home, so this is the just compensation for that, like that. So he's incredibly respectful of all of life, and he would say stuff like, you know, they were here before us, we have no right to displace them, we have no right to, you know, demand that, you know, or, you know, dominion over their home or whatnot, you know. The monkeys would come to him for counsel, literally. Like, they would actually come to him. He would feed them, he would come to them, and he could communicate with them. And like I said, they have a whole kingdom, they have their own, you know, they have their own world, and he would help them settle disputes and whatnot. So incredibly psychic, and all sorts of miracles were attributed to him. He never took credit, but people, many people would say like, oh, Ramana Maharshi did this, Ramana Maharshi did that, we saw him, and he would just say, no, it wasn't me. But it was because, he had, spiritual powers. They call them siddhis in India, in Hinduism. Siddhis are spiritual powers, and he had many siddhis. He could do many things, although because he had no ego, he had no self, he had no individualized self, he never took credit. But it was through him that these things happened, right? And so psychic, he could read people's minds, he could read their thoughts, he knew their intentions, he knew their spiritual development, he knew their karmas, he knew everything. You could not hide anything from him. Right, so this is very powerful, and he was very caring and compassionate. And yeah, Moon's 10th house ruler in the 10th house, shows very prominent career, public image, whatnot. Yeah, very strong. Libra ascendant, so peace, calm, equanimity. Venus is in Scorpio in the 2nd house, which is really interesting. 2nd house is voice, security, family, food, resources, knowledge, but it's got a mutual reception with Mars. Mars is in Taurus, so Mars rules Scorpio, Venus rules Taurus, so they're mutual, and Mars is in the 7th quadrant, but 8th whole sign house and close to the 8th house cusp. So, and Venus is ruling the 8th house cusp, Mars ruling the 2nd, so it's like 2nd and 8th house lords are changing places, changing energies, exchanging energies. So 2nd and 8th, so resources and shared resources, right? And so he's getting a lot of help from the outside. People are coming to him and helping build his ashram. That's literal. People built the physical ashram. They brought many things to him. And so, through speaking and through just being, Venus in the 2nd house also indicates wealth. It's not in good dignity here, but it gains a lot of dignity with its mutual reception to Mars. Mars also is not in good dignity here, but gains dignity there as well. So resources and shared resources are coming, through Venus and Mars. Yeah, so he gets a lot of help from the outside and through other people. And he attracted many, many visitors. And still today, the Arunachala ashram still exists, and people come there all the time, and they receive kind of spiritual blessing. And when he was alive, they received many spiritual blessings from visiting him and being in his presence. Many people awoke completely to their true nature in his presence. Venus has a really nice trine to the moon. That's quite powerful. That's 2 legs of a water trine, Cancer and Scorpio. Venus has a semi-sextile to the sun. Semi-square to the sun. That would indicate some conflict, but really, once your karmas are finished, conflicts don't really, it's all details. None of it really matters. But this would indicate issues, struggles with relationships. If he had relationships of those kinds, especially romantic relationships, issues around food and consumption habits. Yeah, but none of that really was an issue for him. The one thing that was an issue was his health. Saturn in the 6th in poor dignity in Aries. Saturn rules the bones, and 6th house is health, and in Aries, obviously, it's not good dignity, it's too brittle, right? Saturn in Aries indicates and he had health problems. He walked with a cane, his bones were obviously affected by the Saturn in Aries in the 6th, right? And that is square the sun. So Sun square Saturn. This could also indicate issues around authority, but there is an interesting reception here. Sun is exalted in Aries and Saturn rules Capricorn. So there is a kind of reception, a mixed reception, it's called, between exaltation and domicile, but so there's some exchange, but still it can indicate as well certain conflicts. And there were certain I mean, he still exists in the physical body. Some people were very unhappy with him. They came to him, they would yell at him for religious reasons, religious authorities, who were, fundamentalists, but it really wasn't an issue for him. I mean, he handled it, and it never became anything, because he could see right through people. He could see their true intentions. He could see their spiritual evolution, their karmas, everything, and he could look into their eyes and penetrate their soul. Like one story I know, it's this one, I think he was like a maybe Jewish rabbi or something like that, started yelling at him and whatnot. And Ramana Maharshi did not say a word, just stared right into his eyes, right into his soul. And the guy broke down and started crying and went off. It's that, I mean, that sort of thing. Like Ramana Maharshi would he's way above it, like way above it, and that sort of thing. So it's not that these things don't play out, they do, they're just not an issue. And squares and other aspects, even for us in normal mundane life, when we learn how to master them, they're no longer an issue. So when you're an enlightened person, when you're fully enlightened, Buddha consciousness, Christ consciousness, none of these difficult aspects will be a problem. You'll master them. You'll have a potential conflict, but you'll be far above it. It'll just dissolve in front of you. Right? So not an issue. Health, physical body, yeah, but it didn't bother him. He was relieved to die. Like he didn't want he eventually he succumbed to a cancer on his arm. They wanted to operate. He was like, no, leave it. And when he died, he was like extremely grateful. There were tears coming down his face, and he's like, I forget his final words, but he was like, finally, like I get to go home, and dissolve into the universe, into God, and never come back. Right? That's what happens. Maybe come back in some form, but not in a bound way, not in some as have to, right? Just out of pure joy and pleasure and fun or whatever. Let's see what else. Jupiter is in Pisces, so Jupiter is in domicile in Pisces, so Jupiter rules faith, religion, connection to God. And as part of this, it's actually a kite here. We got this great, fantastic, grand Earth trine with Jupiter directly opposite Uranus. And Jupiter, in aspect to Uranus, creates very extreme philosophy, right? But Uranus, in its highest expression, Uranus is the great awakener, right? So part of this grand trine, it's also trine the sun. It's giving a full awakening, a full awareness of everything, of the universe, right? There was nothing that he didn't understand. Like there wasn't any topic you could bring to him that it was beyond him. He wasn't like, I don't know about that. You'll have to go ask somebody else. No, he knew everything. And so that's part of this. Jupiter's in the fifth house. So entertainment, education, also fifth house for Jupiter, especially indicates spiritual practices, spiritual texts, and things like that. So for his spiritual understanding is highly indicated here. Teaching ability, children as well as is also fifth house significance. But what's interesting, obviously he did not marry, he did not have sexual relationships of any kind, but he had many people come to him which were like his children. Everyone who came to him was like a child to him. So that's also fifth house. And you will see sometimes Jupiter in the fifth house for people like that, for spiritual teachers. But this opposition to Uranus shows that his spiritual understanding was very awake, aware. Even though it's an opposition, he's, it's not a hindrance for him. It's just part of this grand kite, air, Earth trine, Earth grand trine, and then Jupiter at the focal point of the kite. Very, very harmonious, right? Very strong, right? We have almost exactly 8, 8, 8, 7, right? almost perfect. 9, right? It's really super strong. And then Saturn also 9. The harmony is unbelievable, amazing. Yeah, Jupiter also is ruling the 3rd house. So for communication, teaching, right? That's very indicated here. Now Mercury, Jupiter also is ruling the 6th house and the 5th house. So Jupiter is ruling the 6th house cusp, but it's more in the 5th quadrant. So yeah, I mean, there's certain, I guess you could say, conflict or service to others. That's probably really the main thing, resolving it through his spiritual wisdom. But Mercury also, it's in the 2nd quadrant, but it's basically 3rd house. So again, like communicating, speaking, teaching, writing. He didn't write, but Sagittarius, so ruled by Jupiter. The philosophy, so communication in the 3rd house, the intellect, and he's very high-minded. Obviously, he was not concerned with academic type stuff, things of that nature. He was versed in spiritual text. I don't think he was much of a reader, but people would read it to him, and he would understand it, and he would be able to interpret it very, very profoundly. Even the Bible, he knew the Bible. He pointed out there was I think he said the most true expression is found in the Bible, and it's that I am that I am, something like that. I think that's what it was, something to that effect. That there could be no more true expression than that. I am that I am. Yeah. Mercury does not really have any bad aspects except to South Node, but that I don't take much, probably when he was a child, he wasn't very good at school because South Node, Moon both indicate early childhood, or first half of life. In conjunct to Mercury is not in good dignity, so his education, he might not have been great at school, he might not have been interested in academia, he's much more philosophical, spiritual. So perhaps, but not very significant. Let's see here. Saturn is ruling the 4th and 5th house. It's in the 6th. So children, obviously, he did not have any children. And again, health issues. The Saturn in the 6th also indicates a lot of hard work. But his hard work was sitting in meditation. So interesting. There's also an inconjunct to Uranus. So that's quite rebellious. When Saturn and Uranus are in difficult aspect, I have the square, and I'm hopelessly rebellious. Just forget it. Like, I'm going to rebel against everything. But yeah, he was pretty rebellious too, against society, against culture, against norms, all of it, religion. He was just not having it. He's just, nope, not going to do it. Yeah. Even his mother, when he first moved to Ramana, he didn't ask his mother. He told his mother, and after he was there, his mother begged him to come home, and he said something to the effect of what is to be will be, and what is not to be will not be, and that basically this is happening. Mom, you can deal with it however you like, but this is the way it is, right? And he was just a kid, and still that was his attitude. Like, I'm living on this mountain, I don't care, Mom. I'm doing it. You can't stop me, and nothing's going to stop me. And I don't think he had any fear of death, but death would not have been a deterrent for him either. He was like, this is destined. This is the way it's going to be. So deal with it, Mom. Your sentimental tears are not going to work, right? So that sort of thing. He's got a Taurus stellium here with Chiron, Neptune, Mars, and Pluto. And it's in the 7th quadrant, but moving into the 8th house, because the Venus is ruling the 8th house cusp. Pluto's clearly in the eighth. Mars is approaching the eighth. And, Neptune and Chiron might be considered more in the seventh. But Taurus is like a rock, Taurus is like the most stable, unmoving sign of all. It's the most unmoving energy. And that's kind of like how he was in life. He was like in many regards, at least physically, Mars, just sitting there. That's what he liked to do. Just sit. Especially early on, he would sit in samadhi. His hair was dreadlocked. He wouldn't shower. He wouldn't eat. They had to force feed him because he was deep into samadhi, which means the self, right? Realizing, having the full realization of the self. And then he came out of it. But after that, he was just like the eyes. Like you could see even in the photos of the eyes, just illumination, like the whole universe was shining through his eyes, right? And so Taurus represents that stability, that unmovingness, right? And Mars has the mutual reception with Venus, so that's kind of strengthening this eighth house cusp, preventing it from any negativity, any harm. By the way, Jupiter ruling the sixth house cusp, Jupiter also in excellent dignity here. So even though Saturn's here, the sixth house is still protected. So he did live a long life. I'm not sure how long, but and his health issues did not hold him back. He still went on walks despite his issues. He had a cane. He still went on walks every day. Still got up. He got up earlier than anyone. He got up at like 3 a.m. and helped the workers. He was always helping the workers. He never felt above them. He never wanted to. That was part of his teaching, like inaction, like humility. Like he was the first to go out and cook and clean and lay the bricks and do all the dirty work. He would do it all, and he was not above anyone. That was very prominent, important for him, and to show that nobody was to be treated less than. Doesn't matter how basic a worker or whatever. He was one of them. So very, very interesting. Chiron is the healer, the wounded healer, right? And it's Chiron in its lower expression is wounds and rejection and pain. But there's no negative aspects to Chiron actually. It's just part of this grand Earth trine. So Chiron in its higher expression is a healer, it's a teacher, it's a shaman, it's a mystic. So Chiron's very, very good. And the seventh house, healing others. With Neptune in its highest expression as well is spiritual, mystic, right? Highly evolved spirituality. Its lower expression obviously is lies, deceit, confusion, delusion, drugs, alcohol, things like that. But obviously he's embodying the highest expression of these. So this is clearly mystic, healing, shaman type, magical, mystical, healing for others. And remember, Mars is, has a mutual reception with Venus here, so that's good. Otherwise, it would be difficult. Mars and Pluto. I mean, it's 11 degrees apart, so not too close. But Mars and Pluto together can be pretty heavy duty. The mutual reception to Venus is helping that out a lot, but Mars and Venus together, or Mars and Pluto together, creates incredible will, strength of will. So his Taurian will, with the Taurian will is the stubborn will, the will to refuse and to just sit there like a rock, right? And that's what he did, right? His ability to just sit there, like no matter what, like didn't matter, rats were nibbling at his feet. He had no food, hadn't bathed, his hair was dreadlocked. He's gonna sit there and not move. That's Taurus. That's Taurian will. So it's just like. And Pluto is the kind of will that will go to the death. It's like, nope, we're not moving. We're gonna die before we change our course. This is it, to the death. This is it, right? That's the kind of will that Pluto embodies. And in Taurus, it's that the unmoving will. So that's really interesting, I think. It's also in the eighth house. So Pluto in the eighth house also has a very strong connection to mystical, occult type stuff, right? So it's like psychic awareness and really deep psychological understanding, great ability to understand human beings and even potentially to control them. But obviously he's not a manipulator. He could be if he wanted to, but this is more like the highest expression of Pluto would be understanding, understanding the psychological motives and the deep inner workings of people and life itself, and using that to help, people. But there's great power, there's great psychic ability with Pluto in the 8th house. But he was a master of it. It was not like this overwhelming desire for him, which it could be for some people, right? So this incredibly powerful chart, right? You can see that just by the shapes of it. You can't deny it. It's not just hyperbole. I'm not just being like, oh, because there's all this talk about it. Like, look at this grand trine, this kite. It's unbelievable. This born during an eclipse, right? The eclipse was probably a few hours earlier because moon would have to be conjunct or directly opposite the sun at 7 degrees, but that's very, very close to the eclipse. The eclipse was probably still in effect at that time. Yeah, and born during eclipse, like I said, shows very powerful life, very powerful destiny. So this is his draconic chart. So this is pretty interesting. Moon's in the 12th house in Libra. So 12th house moon, spiritual, mystical, exotic, foreign lands. Libra, peace. That's quite interesting. Uranus in Scorpio conjunct his ascendant lord Venus in Scorpio. So that's interesting too. Uranus being the great awakener. The grand trine moves into water, which is really interesting as well. Water signs. So that's quite, spiritual, psychic, all that. Ascendant in Capricorn directly on his sun. So that's very powerful for a leader, for an icon. Sun in Pisces. So that again, it's very interesting, definitely, for like a spiritual leader, right? What else? Jupiter directly conjunct Pluto, very powerful spirituality, and practical as well, practical wisdom. He talked about many things, including food, which were, food and different practices, which, that's Taurian wisdom. I have my Jupiter in Taurus, so I understand that kind of thing very well. Then we have the Chiron and Neptune in Cancer in the 10th house, as well as Mars and Pluto. And this is prominent. This is quite good because Neptune and Chiron both have that mystical quality, right? That teacher, healer, mystical, spiritual. So that, for being known and seen as that's quite appropriate. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So I just wanted to briefly show the draconic chart. But guys, that's it for Ramana Maharshi. And if you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already. Leave a comment down below about whatever you like, and book a reading with me. You can find me at macroastrology.com. That's my website. My email is macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com. And I will see you again soon. All right. Thank you. Bye.